Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled EHR Optimization and Decentralized Strategies for Clinical Performance Studies of Liquid Biopsy Technologies in Cancer Screening. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, which is found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. I'd also like to welcome our attendees viewing this presentation from our LinkedIn live event, and I encourage you to submit questions as well via the comments tab. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming to those who register on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Aligo Health Research, who developed the content for this presentation. Aligo Health Research accelerates clinical research through EHR data, their proprietary IntelliGo technology, and direct access to their network of known diverse patients. The ultimate healthcare enabling integrated research organization, their mission is to provide everyone easy access to participation in research and to accelerate clinical trials along the way. They strive to drive research efficiency through innovation and by honoring and maintaining the connection between physicians and their patients. Their work is rooted in the power of healthcare data and its ability to direct clinical research. They believe in the absolute necessity of compliance and change through adoption instead of disruption. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. And first, I'd like to introduce you to Chris Pepper. He is a seasoned business leader and strategist with over 12 years of experience, hi there, Chris, in medical device and diagnostic research. Chris has proven success in building solutions that help clients acquire imaging, biosensor, and diagnostic data to support outcomes in clinical studies. As Senior Director of MedTech and IVD Strategy at Aligo, he oversees relationships with Aligo's IVD and digital health clients, device-focused CRO partners, and works with executive leaderships at Aligo to identify tools and vendors to streamline the execution of diagnostic studies conducted virtually or within the Aligo site network. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Faith Holmes, Chief Medical Officer at Aligo Health Research. Hi there, Faith. Dr. Holmes brings more than 30 years of experience in direct patient care and 11 years of medical practice management with a diverse background in family medicine and palliative care spanning the continuum of the patient journey. As Aligo's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Holmes is integrally involved in the conduct of studies at Aligo's Clinical Research Center, as well as those utilizing Aligo's hybrid or decentralized solutions. She has served as the principal investigator for much of the latter, including interventional and observational studies of diagnostic devices for early detection of various cancers. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Nicole Cowan. Hello there, Nicole. She is a senior leader with extensive experience in strategic planning, clinical trial execution, and the commercialization of the vitro diagnostics. As an IVD operational and strategic consultant, she advises IVD manufacturers on design, execution, and compliance considerations for their clinical studies through her consultancy, the Collective Healing LLC. Nicole has over 13 years direct patient care experience and over 15 years industry experience directing and managing global feasibility, pivotal, and post-market studies. Now, with the introductions out of the way, it is now my pleasure to pass the mic and the controls over to Chris. So Chris, when you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you, Sonia. All right. Well, again, we really appreciate you all joining for our discussion today. If you're attending, there's a high probability that you're involved in the development of IVDs or the business of IVDs, and you are familiar with liquid biopsies. But in case you're not, I'll quickly provide an overview at the moment just for everyone else on the call. So liquid biopsies are diagnostic innovations that are allowing us to isolate molecules from bodily fluids. Analyzing these molecules, we're able to detect the presence of cancer-associated biomarkers. You can see in the forms of, circulating tumor DNA, various types of RNA species, exosomes, and some of the other items you see labeled there on the test tube. Applications of liquid biopsies range from a variety of different driving factors, but the applications that are most interested for us today are screening, but they can also be applied to minimal residual disease following a therapeutic intervention, subtyping of different cancers, risk and prognostic values. But again, with the goal being screening studies, because that's where we're running into a lot of these large clinical performance studies. We'll focus on advantages of that and really the market and applications here for the remainder of the presentation. The advantages here, it's minimally invasive. You're trying to avoid any kind of invasive imaging procedures or invasive biopsies. We've seen higher accuracy from a lot of these tests, and just from, asymptomatic screening of patients, we're running into the ability to look at multiple different types of cancers, even if you're not in high-risk populations. So the idea is just getting these technologies into the hands of practitioners so we can identify disease earlier in patients and intervene earlier. And we're doing everything we can to help get these products to market sooner. In terms of how you're getting to market, there are a number of clinical trials that you have to go through to get your product approved. We try to classify these really in three types of studies. An analytical validation, looking at just technical reliability of your IVD instrument. Clinical validation, just ensuring that your test is accurately identifying the disease that's present in these patients. And then a clinical performance study that's really a combination of those, looking at the sensitivity and specificity for large populations in a real world setting. And this is kind of your pivotal study setting up your approval from the FDA. In terms of just the landscape, we know that there's over 200 different liquid biopsy developers out there. We didn't classify everything today specifically on screening, but we do know that of those 200, there's 58 of them that are actively participating in clinical studies, either doing analytical validation or clinical validation, et cetera. And they each have at least one or more screening different assays. But even though there's all that development and innovation going on, there's only 5 FDA approved devices currently. I think that's going to change in the future, but all 5 of those are colorectal cancer based. But there's a number of ones coming that are focused on lung cancer screening, breast cancer screening, pancreatic, and multi-cancer applications. I think maybe some of the holdup here has just been the guidance from lab developed tests, which we won't get into today, but I think that would also, these are looking specifically at PMA and breakthrough device designations, but that number would be higher if we did account for the lab developed tests. Of the FDA approved devices here, it is worth noting though that one of these actually did conduct a study in a completely virtual manner, which is part of what we're talking about today. We helped them get that approval, and we think that this is going to be the start of multiple projects coming up because it was more efficient, it went through enrollment quicker, and there were many advantages that we'll talk about later in the presentation. So anyway, I think we just on the topic of approval, we do have a poll question that I'd like to get some responses from.
Certainly, I'll launch it right now for everyone to participate. So audience members, this is done in real time, so your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. So it's a very simple question we have for you. What do you see as the most significant hurdle for development of IVDs? Is it reimbursement, regulatory, funding, or supply? So please go ahead and make your selection from the 4 options that we have below. I'll give you about 45 seconds to complete this simple poll question. And then once I see that everyone has participated, I will close the poll, share the results, and we get right back into this great discussion with Chris. Okay, that looks like we've got, oh yeah, we're getting a lot of engagement right now, Chris. So I'm going to leave it open for a few more seconds just to get everyone participating. Okay. All right, thank you. That looks like it is the majority of our audience. So thank you very much, everyone who participated. I'm now going to close the polls and share the results. Okay, let's take a look at the results here. So in our audience, 27% chose reimbursement, while we got 36% that chose regulatory. Then another 27% of our audience chose funding, with only 9% of our audience choosing supply. So that's 27, 36, 27, and 9%. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating in our first poll question. Now back to you, Chris, but before you continue with your great discussion, what are your thoughts on the results of that poll question? Anything surprising there?
Nothing too surprising. I think that the regulatory hurdle just with the FDA guidance on LDTs is definitely top of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Funding, I think we're seeing a large amount of funding coming to these diagnostic companies. So that's surprising to see it, just because we have had, this has been a year where we've started to see more than we have in recent years. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just a waiting game for us all. So we look forward to everyone getting good news and funding and moving some of these technologies forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for sharing.
All right. So we kind of recently covered the liquid biopsy market, but before we dive into really how we got into the liquid biopsy market, we'll talk about what we've done just in that space and IVD in general. This is just a snapshot of what we've done over 3 years. And it's something where organically this just kind of happened because it was needed from an industry perspective. There was the traditional model that was just brick and mortar sites was missing several factors when it came to diversity, especially as those become really topic of mind when we're talking about FDA requirements. But also there were just, the traditional obstacles in general. So from a site perspective, if you're looking at a large academic or research organization, you might have some legal obligations or just legal counterparts that you have to work contracts through that extend the startup period. Additionally, with your resources there at the site, they're not always accustomed to doing clinical research, so taking them out of their standard procedures and having them adapt to the clinical trial protocol is burdensome. From a patient perspective, travel is always burdensome. Some of these patients are traveling hours away just to get to a large research facility and they don't have the treatment nearby. And then from a sponsor's perspective, you all probably know this more than I do, but the relationships that over the years were really, that you have with the sites were relationship driven. They weren't really data driven. You had activation challenges in terms of meeting timelines. Sometimes it's coordinating with logistics or vendors and trying to meet those startup timelines and follow-up timelines. So there was a need for something different, and that's kind of where Eligo came in. Their approach was just adjusting how we went about enrolling patients and recruiting patients into these studies. So rather than starting with those relationships, we started with the patient, looking at patient data specifically through means of EHR queries or identifying them through direct-to-market outreach. We evaluated how can this be more convenient for the patients in general. So exploring their journey, finding out how can we make this convenient for them to participate in these clinical studies, whether it's sending mobile phlebotomists to their home to collect specimens or catching them at the pharmacy when they're picking up routine medication. where can we get them so that we can get the visits, so we can get the collection for these diagnostic studies, and then how can we help facilitate some of the confirmatory data and local resources there, whether it's a local imaging center or a local lab, rather than having to drive a couple hours away to the large research institution. Because we want to obviously enroll as many of these patients as possible, give them treatment or give them access to some of these treatments in the rural community, and prevent as much dropout as possible. So all these things led to us having a solution that was the optimized patient pathway, and then applying a technology that allowed us to remotely pull all this data from these various resources, streamlining it and creating a virtual or a hybrid study in some circumstances. This is just an example of just a difference that a lot of these virtual studies make. This was a large colorectal cancer study that we supported. It was actually the large virtual one I referenced on the experience slide earlier, but had over 14,000 subjects. And there was a very tight timeline. Sponsors looking at what the average enrollment rate were at these academic sites previously, looking at 165 patients per site per month at 32 different sites. And from a direct-to-market approach, we were able to drastically increase the enrollment by identifying patients in underrepresented communities in some of these regions you see just on the heat map here. So on the visual, you see all the icons are sites that would have been on the study, but you can see from the prevalence in these counties across these states, you're missing a lot of the population. So trying to facilitate a virtual study to find these patients and enroll them quicker is really the goal of what we set out to do. Also, from a diversity perspective, again, there's more of a focus on including everyone and ensuring that these tests are accurate and apply to all populations. We have targeted approaches to go if certain populations are needed, but the two data sources at the bottom here, one looking at ethnicity and one looking at patients based on their household income, actually came from two different studies that we're also supporting that didn't have targeted approaches. And you can see that you're able to get an indigenous population and at least a close to 20% African American population without a targeted approach. But if we see through the enrollment process that some of these numbers are lacking, there are obviously strategies that we can put in place to help reach those people and to help encourage a lot of retention in the study. So the two slides I just referenced were really talking about benefits specifically to reducing your enrollment timeline and also to ensuring you meet your diversity strategy requirements. But there's also cost benefits here as well. So if it is a completely virtual study, you will save some costs when it comes to grants and site-based costs. It's not a very large, 30 site study. You could have one central virtual site, or if it was a hybrid, solution, you do reduce some of the grants, although it's counterbalanced by some of the costs associated with branding. But really, there's multiple advantages here. But I think another one of the greatest ones is just a standard approach to how we're screening these patients, how we're ensuring accurate enrollment, and independently evaluating a lot of this data through a central PI. And this is actually the perfect point to transition to Dr. Faith Holmes, our Chief Medical Officer, who served as the central PI on several of these studies and can take us through the details of the design in these studies and just really more details around the patient journey. So at this point, I will transition to you, Faith.
Thanks so much, Chris. So if we made the decision to actually operationalize a decentralized study, we can go to that next slide. One of the first things that we want to do is make sure that we map out the patient who becomes a participant journey throughout the study. And in a decentralized manner, we do have to look at some very specific things that there are a few more logistics to operationalizing when it is either a virtual or a hybrid model. So if we are talking about this beginning of the patient journey, they either respond to a social media outreach, or it may be an outreach if it's a hybrid model through their own physician. They end up with at a study landing page with some initial pre-screening and a follow-up then with a coordinator for pre-screening. That coordinator may be a virtual coordinator who helps facilitate eligibility, responding to questions. Use of an e-consent is something that can facilitate things as well. And then the important part across this entire journey is that you look at the technologies that overlay each step to facilitate this in being less of a burden, not only to the participants, but also to decrease the burden for the study team as well. It's important to make sure that you are in this IVD space, multi-cancer early detection, that you have a lot of really robust conversations with the sponsor about what they want. For instance, at the beginning, when they're doing the eligibility determination, do they want us to go by patient report? And if that's the case, you can combine that screening enrollment visit all into one. Or are they wanting a medical record documentation confirmation of eligibility criteria? If that's the case, then you have to allow that extra timeline as well as some of the technologies to obtain medical records, review records, confirm that eligibility, and then take them to the next step in the pathway, which, depending on the study, may be getting home health out for a home phlebotomy test or dispensing a kit for a self-collection, as in a colorectal cancer study. And then knowing the timeline of what the sponsor requirements are between when you're having that home testing and then, as we put it here, the ground truth or the confirmatory diagnostic, whether that be a low-dose CT, a colonoscopy, a mammogram. And so when you lay out that patient journey, you want to start when that test is going to occur and make sure that you're building it out in timeline so you have appropriate time in between each step. And then the follow-up is important. We want to make sure that there's conversations about, is this protocol set up in a way that there are going to be some follow-up visits to confirm if you're enrolling the healthy normals, 6 months, 12 months, has somebody been diagnosed with a cancer or not? If they have, what kind of data are you wanting to collect? It is an important thing to consider. We've had specific experience where we enrolled healthy normals for a multi-cancer early detection test. It was a single visit and that was it. Subsequent to that, would have patients reach out and say, hey, Dr. Holmes, 4 months after I did that test I came in and did for you, I was diagnosed with stage 4 renal carcinoma. As you can imagine, to a sponsor, that would have been gold. Instead of having what may have been thought of as a false positive, it was actually a true positive. So considering those kinds of things and working with the sponsor to ensure that they're getting the appropriate data that's going to be most robust for them. And it's important to consider the technology across the patient journey, whether it's the website, if they're needing to download apps, if you're going to utilize an e-consent, and then for the follow-up e-pros, and wanting to make sure that there's a way to facilitate supporting them. And for the study team as well, having a single source across all of the continuum of the study, an e-source, is important. And let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk to you a little more about some of that. When we're setting this up, one of the advantages that Chris alluded to with having a central team, I know we refer to it as a decentralized model, but semantically it seems a little backwards. So when you have that central team that is facilitating access to patients, whether it be completely virtually or in a hybrid model with sites, you want to be able to do the entire journey in a single e-source platform. You have a single source for contracting, a single source for budgeting. You have a central team that you're accessing for all of your monitoring visits. This central e-source, which is the IntelliGo that we have utilized, facilitates reporting for milestones back to the sponsor, which is important throughout the life of the study. Having a central electronic investigator site file as well, so that monitors have those two platforms, and across, whether it's hundreds or thousands of participants, they can do the monitoring in those central platforms. Another lesson learned that we've had is when you are discussing with sponsor operationalizing a study in this manner, we want to really ensure that if there's a CRO involved, that there's a communication to the operational teams at the CRO of the difference in the model. So if they're scheduling monitoring visits and it's a hybrid study with local investigators, it's important to include that central PI, central teams in those as well. And part of what this does is it helps in these what are typically high volume studies. If you're involving a site, and if your sites, as eligos typically are embedded within a healthcare practice, this high throughput of participants can be a lot to deal with. And so this decentralized model, we can offload some of the burden onto our central teams through EDC entry, through following along on the monitoring visits, through the centralized teams, responding to queries, doing ECRF sign-offs centrally. Now let's look next at really the two different ways that we're referring to here. And the first one I'll talk about is the virtual model. And so in this next slide, the virtual model, we have a central PI. The central PI is the one who is signing that investigator agreement, and then depending on the size of the study, you'll determine the number of sub-investigators that you'll need, have RN coordinators, and then central teams in order to facilitate medical records collection, and then whatever vendors are needed. If it's dispensing lab kits, if it's dispensing phlebotomists out to the homes. And so it all flows up with no brick and mortar sites at all into the central investigator. And then the next one refers to a hybrid model. In this what we refer to as this hybrid model is you have the central PI, and then at brick and mortar sites, there are local sub-investigators who are bringing participants in through their clinical practices or their research site. One of the things that also is possible, and that's what's important about being agile to respond to the sponsor needs, you can actually do a combination of virtual and hybrid. If you're doing a virtual study, and this has happened with us, and you are really wanting to respond with a particular subgroup within the study, to augment that particular population, and we know we have sites that have that population, then we can bring them in as under the hybrid model, because you've set everything up within a single e-source platform and are able to have everyone use that same platform. The central PI is signing off on the same platform. It facilitates that agility to respond to the sponsor needs. Now, one of the things that is important as well is that we always maintain the central PI oversight. And so that's a question that comes up a lot. So let's talk about that. Just because we're doing it as a central PI model or a decentralized model, it doesn't change at all. If we can go to the next slide, Chris. It doesn't change at all what the regulatory requirements are or any of the steps that are required in a brick and mortar. So if you think about the fact you have SOPs to support a traditional model, but you do have to really look and ensure that you have SOPs to support a decentralized model, that you have appropriate delegation of authority. Even when it's a study where you may have hundreds of people who are doing consenting because you're doing, as for instance, the study with 14,000, That still means that the central PI has to review the credentials of every single person that's on that DOA to ensure they have the training, education, and experience to do what they've been delegated to do. PI will be reviewing and signing off, and you have to make sure that you are setting up your technologies that facilitates, if there's a local investigator, that the PI also has access for sign-off. You have to ensure that there are platforms that provide that visibility so that the PI does have that oversight. And one of the, having been through an FDA audit of one of our decentralized trials, which was going for their submission to FDA and passed with no critical findings. This is something that does get some extra scrutiny when you are doing a decentralized model. The AEs is also something to keep in mind. Even though we always anticipate there will be few AEs that occur in this IBD, multi-cancer early detection space, they do occur. And there has to be a method put in place so that there is a means to always be able to contact that central PI. Central PI, the PI always has to be available 24/7, just like in any study. And you have to have that method for if there are phlebotomists in the home and something occurs there, they need to in real time be able to get a hold of that PI. So all of those things have to be considered when you're doing operationalizing it in this way. One of the things that also is important is setting up a regular cadence of communication throughout the study, not only with the sponsor, CRO, the monitors, but if you are working in the hybrid model as well, doing that with the local investigators. If there are issues, then having regular meetings and being sure to document all of those meetings appropriately so that you are leaving that trail of documentation that reflects PI oversight. And then doing training as needed and updates as you would in any study. And I want to look now just briefly at a case study, and this is one where in this particular instance, we were doing the colorectal cancer screening study, completely virtual model on a single eSource platform that was a data extract then to the sponsor for their final submission, which has gone to approval. And we were able to enroll this actually during COVID period, actually in a year time of over 14,000 patients successfully to be able to provide everything that was needed for the sponsor. So I want to now go to one of our next poll questions. So can we bring that up now?
Certainly, Faith, and I will launch it. And here we go, everyone. Just like we did with the first one, it's done in real time. So your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. And I'll give us about 45 seconds to complete the simple poll question. What is your experience with virtual or hybrid LBX studies? Is it none? Only experience with traditional sites, or is it hybrid? I've used decentralized methods but also utilized traditional sites. Or is it fully DCT? I've run a completely virtual IBD study previously. So please go ahead, everyone, and cast your votes. And then we will close the polls in a few seconds and take a look at the results. Okay, looks like we have an engagement with a majority of our members. So thank you very much. I'll leave it open for a few more seconds as it looks like there are a couple more people making their choice right now. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in poll question number 2. I'm now going to close the polls. Okay, let's take a look at the results here. So in our audience, 53% chose none, only experience with traditional sites, while 33% said hybrid. I've used decentralized methods, but also utilize traditional sites. And then finally, the last option, fully DCT, that was only 13% of our audience. I've run a completely virtual IBD study previously. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating in poll question number 2. And now back to Faith, or is it who's going to be Nicole? Just wondering, Who's going to tell me their thoughts on the results of that poll question? Oh, it's going to be Nicole. Okay, Nicole, what are your thoughts on the results of that poll question? Anything surprising there?
Not too surprised, but pleased to see that the audience have experienced the hybrid and fully decentralized models at a smaller percentage, of course. This is still a new space, and also happy that then this will be a good session to potentially offer some learnings to those that have not yet dwelled in this space.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. So I'm pleased to move into some operational discussion on challenges and advantages based on my experience in hybrid and decentralized trials. So here on this slide, we're focusing on, again, two models, fully decentralized and hybrid. Hybrid being where there is decentralized central oversight, as Faith was explaining, as well as the brick and mortar sites. This model is used often when there are established KOLs, sponsor preferred sites that may be the end users that will ultimately be the customers of these diagnostic tests. A key challenge, particularly with these IVD studies, can be adequate feasibility and site identification reach. And with the decentralized models, it can bolster access to larger pools of subjects and geographical footprints to ensure that diverse enrollment power without the restriction of clinical site locations. With these models bringing the powered subject reach, there are many benefits, including ability to more easily access rural subjects, ensure varying socioeconomic statuses are represented, and steer away from saturated sites and competitive landscapes. These DCT models are particularly powerful for all-comer screening studies, and with fewer sites, it allows for less burden in study startup with fewer contracts, fewer IRBs, site activations, and ultimately overall study startup timeline pickup to get to enrollment faster. When these studies are optimized, they're quite effective and efficient. Operational planning upfront is really important, such as using the EHR data in a decentralized manner for large aggregate data for real-world evidence generation, recruitment targeting, and study design with the understanding that feasibility of using EHR data may be limited to availability of required measurements and data. Planning consent for medical records, including scheduled assessments and retrieval of imaging and pathology data, for example, is also important to consider up front. We can move on to look at further considerations. In research, as we saw by the poll as well, there still remains hesitation due to lack of familiarity with the DCT design and challenges identifying opportunity for applying these decentralized models to study designs. Some critical considerations for manufacturers and sponsors, as well as the partner or CRO that should have strategic recommendations and solutions, are focus on approaches for reduced patient burden to optimize adherence and sample collection, considering full DCT designs for protocols with a single blood draw or specimen collection, and evaluating centralized PI experience and training where unique, optimized communication plans are especially important when the study is a hybrid DCT. An additional consideration in line with the recent guidance from the agency is where and what community practices may be used for protocol assessments in concert with the central PI infrastructure. We will discuss more considerations for subject identification and enrollment, vendor collaboration, and data, but let's first look at a DCT hybrid case study. With respect to design, technologies and opportunities for improved strategies are evolving quickly, just as clinical research is. Of course, the potential to implement full DCT or hybrid solutions are ideally identified in the planning stages and implemented before studies start. I have experienced instances of applying DCT mid-study and moving through protocol amendments as a strategy adjustment due to clinical trial execution challenges. This study is an example and was experiencing enrollment timeline delays due to a myriad of reasons, which was impacting corporate milestones with increased pressure to meet market launch. There remained a key need for collection of quality data to overcome the enrollment lag and the sample endpoint gap. Here, by applying a hybrid DCT model, site activation and first patient enrolled under the central PI were achieved in just a couple of months, and 5,000 subjects were enrolled in just over 5 months by a couple of methods. One, rapidly identifying the patients via EHR to target qualified patients, and establishing central PI oversight while collaborating with integrated physicians as partners in the research process to enhance patient engagement. Additionally, targeted recruitment strategies were deployed, such as digital advertising and a robust referral program. Collectively, this resulted in substantiating the required enrollment and necessary data endpoints. Recruitment and retention strategies, particularly for IVD studies with those multiple collections, are essential, and we can move on to look at some considerations. It's important to plan viable remote recruitment strategies that can adequately identify potential subjects that align with the inclusion-exclusion criteria and specimen requirements. Strategic planning should include where to place ads, how to drive engagement using digital outreach campaigns, search engines based on target populations, and pre-screening customized tools to achieve a patient funnel large enough to meet the enrollment targets. Also, training materials for virtual e-consent, as well as planning for medical record collection, are important to consider to avoid enrollment barriers and ensure the patient targets will support the data collection aims. Creation and timing of patient-facing materials such as e-consent are especially important for submission to IRBs as early as possible to not only prevent delays in approval, especially as these DCT study structures under centralized PIs may move faster than traditional brick and mortar sites. Ensuring patients are engaged from study start through final visits using a patient concierge approach has proven to help engagement, where timing and interaction considerations are important to ensure support without saturating the patient. Patient reminders, also direct-to-patient contact, need to be handled with care by properly trained staff to communicate remotely for scheduling, visit reminders, and the follow-ups if those are part of the design. Lastly, an important point is the post-visit and or post-study completion stipends. Those are important for the extra effort required by patients to participate and provide valuable data. This should be assessed during study budget planning to prevent unforeseen costs. Let's look at an applicable vendor consideration for specimen collection in these types of IVD studies on the next slide here. Here you can see diverse participant sample collection has been achieved using decentralized modalities such as mobile phlebotomy. Design considerations may include mobile phlebotomy, may include self-collection, and also shipment considerations for quality sampling and cost. Ensuring experienced suppliers relevant to the specimen type and method collection are important to not only support protocol and sample requirements such as pre-processing, temperature, storage, but also shipping considerations. From a sponsor standpoint here, it's important to ensure that the central lab processing and especially testing capacity is able to accommodate the enrollment and the sample collection. Collection surges that could come with the strategic DCT and or hybrid approaches, they're powerful, and there's a need to ensure that the full ROI without a lag at the end of chain of custody is there. And lastly, we can touch on data and system optimization. So looking at this slide, we'll start to wrap up here with a few points in respect to study data. Protocol-driven data requirements should be reviewed to ensure alignment on what will make a complete data set and what may be additional optional data, as said by the sponsor. Analysis of what data will live where and if or how the various systems that store the data are compatible, for ease of data review, for overall comprehensiveness, for timeliness, and so on. For example, imaging data size and quantity may require its complete own system outside of the electronic data capture system, or EDC. Also with the medical history, will the medical history and or the outcomes be self-reported as ePro? Can the ePro and COA data be easily transmitted into the EDC? Another further consideration could be, what are the projected queries required to ensure all of the sample-related data is obtained in a timely manner? Training the centralized team on these expectations in line with the sponsor expectations is critical to ensure alignment. For example, is there defined data for use in a centralized targeted monitoring strategy? This could be used for trends, for proactive review and analysis. And this will be important to track performance and to confirm milestones are on track. It also allows an opportunity to pivot if necessary. So it's a good risk-based system. There really are many considerations that can all point back to the early evaluation of the study design. What decentralized model is the best fit? Can it be fully decentralized? Will hybrid be a better fit? And thorough evaluation of the data sources to map the ideal suite of technologies. These are all paramount for quality, for ease, and for cost containment. I'll close here. I hope this has been informative. Back to you, Sonia.
Well, thank you very much for that very insightful presentation, Nicole, Faith, and Chris. And we will all join in now with our webcams on to begin the Q&A portion of the webinar. And now I'd like to invite our audience to continue sending their questions or comments for the Q&A portion of the webinar. And if you are attending via GoToWebinar, please use the questions window. And for those of you that are watching on LinkedIn Live events, feel free to post your questions in the comment section. So I've already received some questions while you were speaking, so let's start with this first one here. And this audience member is directing this question to Faith. So Faith, do you encounter many obstacles for obtaining medical records from the patient's care providers, and how have you overcome these? That's a great question, Faith. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, getting those medical records to be able to look at whatever that confirmatory test is important. And that goes back to that patient journey that I was talking about in ensuring that you set that up, for instance, that you're only triggering the medical records release that in a timely manner so that you're not going to be sending it before it's actually going to be ready at the site. So that's one of the first things that you have to do. But then in addition, there's some vendors that you can use that can sometimes help facilitate this to collect the records. And there's always a certain amount that are a little more difficult. So some of the strategies that we have employed is we have a series of letters that go out to the wherever you're trying to collect the records from the PI, being aware of whatever the local state medical board requirements are for timely release of medical records. And sometimes you need to gently remind people of that. And sometimes build in, if it's something where you have to employ the aid of the study participant to obtain those medical records, a little extra stipend for them if that's necessary. So those are some of the things that we've employed.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for sharing that, Faith. Let's jump to our next question. This audience member is asking, how do you deal with a 2 to 5 year follow-up duration with minimal activity to ensure a full data collection? Another great question, and who would like to jump in on that one?
I can speak to that one as well. That's something that we've definitely had some experience and lessons learned on that. One of the things that we would hear from sponsors in this space, for instance, is, well, all we're doing is asking them to respond to, you know, 1 or 2 questions, and we're just going to send it out to them via an email or a text platform. And it takes such a minimal time, we really shouldn't have to pay any type of stipend for that. I think one of the important things to realize in the world that we live in today, and I do think COVID had an impact on people's awareness about clinical research, is the general population recognizes the value of their data. And so we literally have had some say, you want me to share more information that's going to go into your submission, then you pay me something for it. So that's a little blunt, but that is our experience. And I think it's important for sponsors to be aware of that and to just build that into their budgeting process. And then the other part of it is for some people, just that education about what is the long-term intent of the study and what are they looking at. And for some people, that involvement in long-term research and contributing to science it is enough. But if you really want to maximize the number of participants who are actually doing that follow-up, then I think that is really important to consider that.
Okay, thank you very much for that detailed answer, Faith. We'll jump to the next question here, and this looks like it's for you, Nicole. This audience member is asking you, how do you think the LDT ruling will impact the need or use of decentralized trials?
It's a good question, and to the top of mind for many of us and many of our manufacturers and sponsors right now. This has been something that has been coming for almost 30 years. It is a very big impact that it's officially mandating now that these laboratory-derived tests or tests that have solely been developed and utilized in one lab are now going to be required to be managed and regulated as full in vitro diagnostic tests. And what that means for us here is that there will be a large bolus of clinical trials that will become required for those manufacturers and sponsors that are looking to retain these products on the market. And with that will come a need for access to patient populations and samples to generate the data that will be required to classify these as regulated IVDs. With that, I think the decentralized and the hybrid models that we talked about today will provide a lot of service and power to these studies that have to be performed, because we know that we already encounter some saturation of sites, limitations, all of the patient demographics we're trying to access. So I think the decentralized or hybrid strategies that can be used can allow for these studies to be run in a timely manner in less of a saturated way as we become more comfortable with these strategies.
Thank you so much for that, Nicole. All right, just looking at the time here, I think we have time to squeeze in 2 more questions. Let's take this one here. Oh, this is an interesting one. How can you ensure that the EHR records of some 140,000 people are properly evaluated for participating in that study?
It was actually 14,000, not
14,000.
140,000,
Okay.
which is like, phew.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
You could have a large study, who knows?
Exactly. So for that particular study, when the records came in, we literally had a team of 12 physicians who were reviewing each individual colonoscopy and, if applicable, pathology report and the pre-op or consult note. And so the first step in reviewing those records was to ensure there wasn't anything that came up in the medical history that would have made them ineligible. You know, for instance, if in the screening process somebody said, yeah, I didn't have a colonoscopy, you know, for the last 9 years. But if we could see in the medical record that there was an indication that they had had one, then that person became unavaluable. So it was literally an evaluation of each one. Now, where there's some other studies that we've been involved with, where there was some AI involved in helping to sort of facilitate and speed along that medical record review process. It also is important when you're thinking about it to not do a medical records release that says, we want all medical records. As you can imagine, in the day in which we live with all of the EMRs, I mean, you will get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. So when you get the medical records release, be very specific about what you need, what you're looking for with regard to the content, as well as the time frame that you need for the purposes of the study. And thanks for bringing that question up, because just because it's DCT, hybrid, virtual, it doesn't change the fact that the PI, the investigator, has to confirm eligibility into that study, and it's a very robust process.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Faith. All right, I'm going to squeeze one last question in. With the FDA's continuing to push for diversity goals in clinical trials, do you see these models helping meet those goals? Who's tackling that one?
I'll let Faith talk, but I think the answer is
okay. All right.
I do. Yes.
Yeah, and I think we covered some of that to a certain degree, but I think it does. I mean, absolutely, that geographic diversity is something that I think was shown on a couple of the slides, where so many of the patient population does not have access or proximity to a research site, so you can get that geographic diversity. Also, when you're deploying into the home for either self collection, or if it is sending phlebotomists, that facilitates that socioeconomic diversity sometimes, because they may not be able to travel to a site. They may not be able to take time off work. And so that's, you know, a lot of people don't think about geographic socioeconomic diversity, but they're a lot of the time thinking about is race, ethnicity. And it does have an impact there as well. And you can do targeted advertising if it's virtual. And then in addition, for instance, when we have some sites that are research facilities that are within a practice that we know is a very high percentage of a diverse population with regard to race, ethnicity, we can bring them in to augment those kinds of populations.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for answering that question. Thank you very much to everyone for answering all those questions. We have reached the end of the Q&A portion of the webinar. And if we could not attend to your questions, rest assured the team at Eligo will follow up with you after this presentation. And if you have any further questions, please utilize the email address you see there on your screen, and it's tanner.douglas@eligodirect.com. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive of this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated, as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Additionally, I will be sharing a link, just give me a few seconds, to view today's recording event in the chat box, which you can also share with your colleagues once they register for the recording here as well. And for those of you watching via LinkedIn Live events, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com to register for this event and gain access to features such as viewing the recording and more. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers for their time here today. So thank you very much, Chris, Faith, and Nicole, for your time. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your XTalks moderator. On behalf of the team here at XTalks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now. Bye, everyone. Bye, Faith. Bye, Chris. Bye, Nicole.
Hey, Sonia, thank you.
Bye.